The day started like any other: court briefings, a morning coffee, and the usual hustle at the firm. Little did I know, my life was about to spiral into a nightmare beyond comprehension. A text alert on Sarah's phone, left carelessly unlocked on the kitchen counter, was the first crack in the facade. "Tonight's meeting is set. Don't forget the papers," it read. The sender? Michael Reed. Her ex-boyfriend. Suspicion burned at the edges of my mind. I knew of Michael. Sarah had spoken about him years ago as a mistake from the past. I'd always believed that chapter was closed. But seeing his name reappear in such a cryptic context was unsettling. I began noticing things that were otherwise unremarkable: Sarah's late-night yoga classes and her sudden, uncharacteristic interest in estate planning. At first, I dismissed these as coincidences, but the text had planted a seed of doubt. That night, I waited until Sarah was asleep and combed through her laptop. What I found was devastating. Emails between her and Michael detailing an elaborate scheme. They planned to stage a boating accident that would result in my death. Michael, it seemed, was helping Sarah forge legal documents to transfer my assets to her. Worst of all, they intended to take my children away, discrediting me as an unfit father. My hands trembled as I pieced together their plan. I had always prided myself on my ability to read people, yet here I was, blindsided by the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I began documenting everything: the emails, their messages, and Sarah's increasingly erratic behavior. Hiring a private investigator was my next step. The PI confirmed my worst fears. There were meetings between Sarah and Michael, hidden transactions, and even a rented storage unit where they kept forged documents and other evidence of their conspiracy. It was during this time that I noticed Sarah becoming unusually affectionate toward me, as though trying to mask her guilt. "We should take a vacation, just the two of us," she suggested one evening. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes betrayed something darker. My blood ran cold at the thought of what a secluded getaway might entail. The breaking point came one evening when I overheard Sarah's phone conversation with Michael. She was in the study, her voice low but sharp. "He's still clueless. Just a few more weeks, and it's all ours." I recorded the conversation from behind the door. My instincts screamed for me to confront her, but I knew better. I needed to gather enough evidence to protect myself and my children. The unraveling began when I decided to test Sarah's loyalty. Over dinner, I casually mentioned a fake business trip out of state. Her eyes lit up briefly before she quickly masked her excitement. "Oh, that's a shame. I'll miss you," she said, but her tone lacked sincerity. That evening, I made sure she saw me pack a bag and leave the house. I didn't go far, parking my car a few blocks away and returning home on foot. From the shadows, I watched as Michael arrived within an hour. They spoke in hushed tones before retreating to the study. I couldn't hear much, but the sight of them together was enough to solidify my resolve. The next day, I contacted my lawyer, outlining everything I'd discovered. He advised me to act quickly but cautiously, ensuring that Sarah and Michael wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. Together, we began the process of securing my assets and safeguarding my children. The final confrontation came sooner than I anticipated. Sarah, sensing my distance, cornered me one evening. "Is something wrong, Alex? You've been so quiet lately," she probed, her voice laced with faux concern. I looked her in the eye, the weight of my knowledge pressing heavily on my chest. "Sarah, do you love me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" Her response was automatic, devoid of genuine emotion. I let the silence hang between us before walking away, leaving her questions unanswered. It was then I realized the woman I once loved no longer existed, if she ever had. In the days that followed, the trap I had set for Sarah and Michael was sprung. The private investigator, working alongside law enforcement, uncovered even more damning evidence: falsified insurance claims, a web of deceit that spanned months, and enough proof to ensure their scheme couldn't be denied. The night they were arrested was both a relief and a heartbreak. Watching Sarah in handcuffs, her eyes filled with fury rather than remorse, was a painful confirmation of how far she had fallen. As I sit here recounting this, my children asleep upstairs, I feel a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also hope. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it's also a lesson, a reminder of the strength within us to fight for what matters most. The next chapter of my nightmare began the morning I received a call from Olivia Hart. She was a digital forensics expert I had hired through my lawyer after Sarah and Michael's conspiracy was exposed. Olivia's voice carried a mix of urgency and disbelief. "Alex, you need to see what I've found. It's bigger than we thought." I arrived at her small office in a nondescript building downtown, my son Liam at my side. I had shared just enough with Liam to explain why our lives had been so chaotic recently. At 15, he was sharp, curious, and fiercely protective of our family, qualities that had made him an unexpected ally in my search for justice. Olivia ushered us into her office, her face pale but determined. She had compiled a series of folders on her computer, each meticulously labeled. She didn't mince words. "Michael Reed isn't just a con artist. He's a murderer and a fraud. What I've uncovered spans over a decade." She clicked on a file labeled Emily Hart. The screen filled with images and documents that made my stomach churn. Emily, a bright-eyed college student, had disappeared 8 years ago. She had been Olivia's younger cousin. Her murder was still unsolved, but Olivia had always suspected Michael. "I didn't have enough to connect him back then," Olivia explained, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But now, with access to Sarah's laptop and Michael's emails, I found it. Michael was her boyfriend at the time. He was the last person to see her alive." She showed us emails Michael had sent to an associate in the weeks following Emily's death. They were laced with veiled threats and references to handling the Emily problem. One email even detailed a payment to someone identified only as J. Olivia's jaw clenched as she pointed to a transfer of $10,000 to a now-defunct account. "He paid someone off to cover his tracks," she said. "And I'm certain it ties him to Emily's murder." Liam sat beside me, his face pale but determined. "Dad, we have to do something. We can't let him get away with this." His words mirrored my own thoughts. I nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We will. I promise." But Olivia wasn't finished. "There's more," she said grimly, opening another folder labeled Pharmacion Fraud. Michael had worked briefly for a pharmaceutical company called Pharmacion nearly a decade ago. Olivia had unearthed documents that proved he had falsified research data for a painkiller the company was developing. The drug, based on Michael's fabricated results, was rushed to market and later linked to multiple deaths due to unreported side effects. "This is why he left Pharmacion," Olivia explained. "They covered it up to avoid a scandal, but Michael was fired quietly. He blackmailed his superiors into silence and walked away with a hefty severance package. The sheer scale of his crimes left me reeling. It wasn't just my life Michael had tried to destroy, it was countless others. He was a predator who left ruin in his wake, and it was up to us to stop him." Over the next few weeks, Liam and I worked closely with Olivia to build an airtight case against Michael. It was exhausting and often dangerous work. At one point, Liam discovered that Michael had installed spyware on Sarah's laptop to monitor her actions. Olivia managed to trace the software back to a server Michael was using, uncovering even more incriminating evidence. Among the files was a chilling journal Michael kept, detailing his manipulations and schemes. In one entry, he wrote about how easy it was to coerce Sarah into his plans, calling her desperate and predictable. Another entry described his satisfaction in evading justice for Emily's murder, calling it a masterstroke of diversion. Liam, ever the tech-savvy teenager, took on the role of cataloging and organizing the evidence. His determination was inspiring, though it pained me to see my son pulled into such a dark world. "We'll stop him, Dad," he said one night as we pored over files. "We have to." The breakthrough came when Olivia decrypted a heavily encrypted file Michael had tried to hide. It contained a video, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. It showed Michael and another man, likely Jay, dragging a lifeless Emily into a wooded area. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth as she watched, tears streaming down her face. "That's the proof," she whispered. "That's what we needed." We turned the video over to the authorities, along with the mountain of evidence we had gathered. It was enough to reopen Emily's case and launch a federal investigation into Pharmacion's fraudulent practices. Michael's arrest came 2 weeks later. The sight of him being led away in handcuffs was a small but significant victory. Sarah, too, faced charges for her involvement in the conspiracy against me, though her role in Michael's larger crimes remained unclear. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that justice might prevail. Liam and I returned home that evening, exhausted but relieved. As we sat on the couch, the weight of everything we had endured began to lift, if only slightly. "We did it," Liam said quietly. "We stopped him." I pulled him into a hug, grateful beyond words for his strength and resilience. "We did," I agreed. "And we'll keep moving forward, no matter what." Looking back, I'm struck by how much Liam and Olivia taught me about courage and perseverance. They were my anchors in a storm I never saw coming, and together, we uncovered truths that might otherwise have been buried forever. The gala was the perfect setting for the final act. It was a black-tie affair filled with the city's elite, a gathering of politicians, corporate leaders, and philanthropists. Michael would be there, of course. He thrived in such environments, charming people with his smooth talk and fabricated charisma. It was the stage he thought he owned. Tonight, though, it would become the scene of his undoing. I arrived with Liam and Olivia at my side. Liam, in a sharp suit, looked more like a young man than the teenager who had joined me in this fight. Olivia, always composed, carried a small leather bag containing the tools of our operation, a tablet, a projector, and enough evidence to dismantle Michael's life piece by piece. As we entered the grand ballroom, the weight of what we were about to do pressed heavily on me. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my reputation, and my family. I glanced at Liam, his jaw set with determination, and felt a surge of pride. Together, we'd come this far. There was no turning back now. The event was in full swing when I spotted Michael across the room. He was surrounded by a small group of admirers, his laughter booming as he regaled them with one of his well-practiced anecdotes. Sarah wasn't far from him, dressed in a sleek black gown that belied her inner turmoil. She had reluctantly agreed to testify against Michael after being presented with the overwhelming evidence Olivia and I had gathered. It wasn't easy for her to turn on him, but she had no other choice. Her survival depended on it. I made my way to the podium at the front of the room, where the evening's host was wrapping up a speech. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the spotlight as the room fell silent. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I know we're here to celebrate philanthropy and community, but I must ask for a few moments of your time to address something far more serious." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I gestured to Olivia, who began setting up the projector. Liam stepped forward, a small remote in his hand, ready to play the first piece of evidence. "I've uncovered a conspiracy," I continued, my eyes sweeping the room. "A plot orchestrated by a man who has spent years deceiving, manipulating, and destroying lives. That man is Michael Reed." Gasps and whispers broke out, with heads turning to Michael, who stood frozen in disbelief. His mask of confidence faltered, but he quickly composed himself, raising his voice to challenge me. "This is absurd, Alex," he said, forcing a laugh. "What are you talking about?" I ignored him, signaling Liam to start the video. The projector came to life, displaying a series of emails between Michael and Sarah. They detailed their plans to stage my death and seize my assets. The room fell into stunned silence as the audience read the damning messages. Michael's face turned red as he shouted, "This is nonsense. These could be fake. You're a lawyer. You know how easy it is to fabricate evidence." Olivia stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative. "These emails were retrieved from Sarah's laptop and verified by independent forensic experts. They are authentic, and there's more." She gestured to Liam, who played the next video. It was a recording of Michael admitting to his crimes during a private conversation with Sarah. His voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the room as he outlined his intentions with chilling precision. The crowd erupted into chaos. People murmured and gasped, some openly confronting Michael, who was now visibly panicked. He turned to leave, but 2 police officers stationed near the entrance stepped forward, blocking his path. "Sit down, Michael," I said, my voice cutting through the commotion. "We're not done yet." The final piece of evidence was the most damning. Olivia played the decrypted video showing Michael and his accomplice disposing of Emily Hart's body. The room was deathly silent as the grainy footage played, the weight of its implications sinking in. "This man isn't just a con artist," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He's a murderer." Emily Hart was Olivia's cousin, a bright, young woman whose life was cut short because of him. I turned to Sarah, who stepped forward hesitantly. She looked frail, her once confident demeanor shattered by guilt and shame. "I didn't want to believe it at first," she said, her voice trembling. "But Michael manipulated me. He used my fears, my insecurities, and turned me into his pawn. I'm here to tell the truth because it's the only way I can begin to make amends." The room was electric with tension. Michael, cornered and desperate, lashed out. "You're all fools. This is a setup. They're framing me." The police officers moved in, but Michael resisted, his voice rising to a near scream. "You'll regret this, Alex. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The officers subdued him, and as they led him away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. The man who had tried to destroy my life was finally facing justice. The rest of the evening was a blur. Reporters swarmed the ballroom, eager for quotes and sound bites. Olivia and Liam stayed close, their presence a comforting reminder of the team that had made this moment possible. Sarah disappeared quietly, her role in the conspiracy exposed but her cooperation acknowledged by law enforcement. As the crowd thinned and the adrenaline wore off, I found myself standing alone by the podium, staring out at the empty ballroom. Liam approached, placing a hand on my arm. "We did it, Dad," he said softly. "It's over." I turned to him, my heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "We did," I replied, pulling him into a hug. "And I couldn't have done it without you." The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media attention. Michael was charged with multiple crimes, including conspiracy, fraud, and murder. Sarah cooperated fully, providing key testimony that sealed his fate. Olivia's expertise and courage were widely recognized, her name becoming synonymous with justice. For me, life began to take on a new normal. The scars of betrayal and loss would always remain, but so would the lessons I had learned about resilience, family, and the power of truth. Liam returned to school, his spirit unbroken despite the trials he had faced. And as I watched him grow into the man he was becoming, I knew that, despite everything, we had emerged stronger. Justice had been served, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting. The nightmare was over, and a new chapter was beginning, one filled with hope, healing, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The trial of Michael Reed was the culmination of months of relentless effort. Every moment spent uncovering his crimes, every sleepless night cataloging evidence, led to this. It was a spectacle that gripped the entire city, drawing crowds of reporters, legal enthusiasts, and even protesters to the courthouse steps. For me, it was the final test, a chance to ensure that justice would prevail and the lives he had ruined would find closure. From the moment I stepped into the courtroom, I felt the weight of what was at stake. Liam was by my side, his presence a quiet reminder of what we were fighting for. Olivia was seated in the row behind us, a steady source of support and expertise. Sarah, escorted in by her legal counsel, avoided my gaze. The lines of guilt and shame on her face told me everything I needed to know about her state of mind. Michael entered last, flanked by 2 guards. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a sullen defiance. He scanned the room with cold eyes, his jaw clenched as he took his seat. I could feel the tension radiating from him, but it no longer had power over me. This was his reckoning. The prosecution's case was airtight, thanks to the evidence we had gathered. Olivia's expert testimony laid out Michael's digital footprint in excruciating detail. She explained how he had manipulated data, forged documents, and concealed his activities for years. Her analysis of the spyware he installed on Sarah's devices was damning, painting him as a calculating predator who left nothing to chance. But it was the testimony about Emily Hart that truly silenced the courtroom. The grainy video of Michael and his accomplice disposing of her body was played again, this time for the jury. Emily's family was present, their grief palpable as they watched the final moments of her life being exploited by this man. Olivia's voice trembled as she recounted her cousin's dreams and potential, now forever lost. The prosecution also brought forward a parade of witnesses, former colleagues, victims of his fraud schemes, and even a whistleblower from Pharmacion. Each one painted a picture of a man who thrived on manipulation and destruction, using others as pawns in his endless pursuit of power and wealth. Sarah's role in the trial was pivotal. Under oath, she described how Michael had drawn her into his web of deceit, preying on her vulnerabilities and exploiting her trust. She admitted to her part in the conspiracy against me, taking responsibility for her actions. It was a devastating moment when she broke down on the stand, confessing how she had put her desires above her children's well-being. "I was weak," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And he used that against me. I can't undo what I've done, but I can tell the truth now." Her cooperation earned her some leniency, but it wasn't enough to absolve her. The court's focus soon shifted to the custody battle over our children. I had filed for sole custody, supported by the overwhelming evidence of her negligence and involvement in Michael's schemes. The defense's attempts to counter the charges were weak at best. Michael's lawyers argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that he was a victim of a vendetta orchestrated by me. They painted me as a jealous, controlling husband seeking revenge, but the sheer volume of proof against Michael made their claims laughable. Their most desperate move came when they tried to shift blame for Emily's death onto his accomplice, the elusive Jay. But the prosecution had already tracked down Jay, who, in exchange for a reduced sentence, testified against Michael. His account corroborated everything we had uncovered, cementing Michael's guilt. The verdict came after weeks of testimony and deliberation. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled as the jury filed back in. My heart pounded as the foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that would determine Michael's fate. On the count of first-degree murder, the foreman began, "We find the defendant, Michael Reed, guilty." Each charge was read aloud: fraud, conspiracy, corruption, and more. The verdict was the same for every count: guilty. Michael sat stone-faced as the judge delivered his sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. It was the maximum penalty, a fitting end for a man who had destroyed so many lives. As the gavel struck, a wave of relief washed over me. Michael's reign of terror was finally over. The custody hearing followed shortly after. I stood before the judge, presenting my case with the support of a child psychologist and character witnesses. Liam even spoke on my behalf, his voice steady as he described the pain and confusion he had endured because of Sarah's actions. "She wasn't there for us," he said, his words cutting to the heart of the matter. "Dad was the one who held us together. He protected us. Sarah didn't fight the decision. Perhaps she knew it was futile, or perhaps guilt had finally broken her spirit." The court awarded me sole custody of Liam and my younger daughter, Emily. Sarah was granted supervised visitation, but even that felt like a hollow victory for her. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new normal. Michael's sentencing and Sarah's punishment were widely covered in the media, their names forever tied to scandal and betrayal. Olivia's role in the investigation brought her well-deserved recognition, and she was inundated with offers from law enforcement and private firms. She remained a close friend, someone who had proven her loyalty and courage in ways I could never repay. Liam returned to school with a newfound sense of purpose. He had been tested in ways no teenager should ever face, yet he emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to make a difference in the world. Watching him grow into the man he was becoming filled me with pride and hope. As for me, I found solace in the simple moments: dinner with my kids, quiet evenings free of fear, and the knowledge that we had survived. The scars of betrayal would never fully fade, but they became a reminder of the strength we had found in each other. Justice had been served, and though the road had been long and treacherous, it led us to a place of healing and renewal. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could look to the future with optimism, knowing that the worst was behind us. Rebuilding life after the chaos Michael had caused felt like standing at the edge of a vast, empty canvas. The nightmare was behind us, but it had left holes in our lives that needed filling. For me, the way forward was clear. I had spent months fighting for justice, uncovering corruption and deceit. It had ignited a passion I couldn't ignore. So, I decided to turn my legal skills and newfound perspective into a force for good. I left my old firm behind, distancing myself from the corporate grind that had once defined my career. Instead, I founded a new practice, Integrity Legal Solutions. Our mission was simple yet ambitious: to expose corporate crime and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Olivia was the first person I called to join me. "Ewan?" I asked her one evening, standing in her modest office where our fight had begun. She grinned, the kind of grin that told me she was already 2 steps ahead. "You couldn't stop me if you tried." The firm took shape faster than I expected. Olivia brought her unparalleled expertise in digital forensics, while I focused on building a team of like-minded professionals. People who believed that justice wasn't just a lofty ideal but something worth fighting for every day. Our first cases were small but meaningful: whistleblowers facing retaliation, fraud victims seeking restitution, and employees wrongfully terminated for standing up to unethical practices. As we gained momentum, so did my sense of purpose. Each victory, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a piece of the world Michael had tried to tear apart. Liam often stopped by after school, curious about the work we were doing. Watching him take an interest filled me with hope. My children had been through more than most kids their age, but they were resilient. Liam, especially, had grown into a young man I couldn't have been prouder of. The trial and its aftermath had shaped him, revealing a depth of character I hadn't fully realized before. He became deeply interested in law enforcement, inspired by the investigators who had brought Michael to justice. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me. "Dad, I think I want to be a detective." I smiled, ruffling his hair as he rolled his eyes. "You'd be a damn good one, Liam. You've already got the instincts." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I want to help people the way you and Olivia did. I don't want anyone else to go through what we did." Sophie, my youngest, had a quieter strength. At 10, she had witnessed the unraveling of our family but managed to hold on to her innocence and compassion. As she grew, so did her interest in social work. By her teenage years, she was volunteering at community centers, helping kids who had experienced their own hardships. She came to me one afternoon, holding a flyer for a mentorship program at the local youth center. "Can I do this, Dad? They're looking for volunteers." Her enthusiasm was contagious. "Absolutely, sophomore. They'd be lucky to have you." Watching her blossom into a kind, empathetic young woman reminded me that, despite everything, we had come out stronger as a family. Both Liam and Sophie had found ways to turn their pain into purpose, and that was something no amount of betrayal could take from us. The years passed, and Integrity Legal Solutions grew into a respected firm. We tackled high-profile cases, exposing fraudulent CEOs, dismantling corrupt organizations, and helping whistleblowers find justice. Each success felt like a step toward restoring faith in a system that so often failed the vulnerable. Olivia became my closest ally, both in the office and as a friend. Her relentless pursuit of the truth and sharp wit kept us grounded during even the most challenging cases. One day, after a particularly grueling court battle, she leaned back in her chair and grinned. "You know, Alex, we've built something pretty incredible here." I nodded, thinking of the lives we'd touched, the families we'd helped. "Yeah, we have. And we're just getting started." At home, life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. Liam went on to join the police academy, his dedication earning him top marks. Sophie continued her volunteer work, eventually pursuing a degree in social work. Seeing them thrive was the greatest reward I could have asked for. On weekends, we'd gather around the dining table for family dinners, sharing stories of our weeks. They were simple moments, but they carried a weight I didn't take for granted. We had faced darkness together, and now we were creating something brighter. Looking back, it's clear that the betrayal and pain Michael brought into our lives didn't define us. What defined us was how we fought back, how we stood together, found strength in each other, and rebuilt what had been broken. My life now is filled with purpose, not just because of the work I do but because of the family I've built. Liam and Sophie are living proof that even in the aftermath of devastation, there's room for growth, for healing, and for hope. We didn't just survive, we thrived. And that, I think, is the greatest justice of all.